Come on and cry me a river, cry me a river. I cried a river over
Hello everyone and welcome to this Thursday 29th of January 2026. Okay, today we have an article that is not very much related to psychology, but I found it very interesting, so I think you're gonna like it. I believe so. So, let's go into it right now. No time to waste. It's about time. It's about time. Let me arrange the volume of the music and start. Weapons of Time, Salvatore Pais, and the Vacuum's Edge of Causality. What a title! Just because the title, I wanted to read it with you. So, I'm new as you. I hope it's new for you. Let's start. What if the ultimate weapon isn't a bomb, a drone, or a cyber exploit, but a threshold in physics so extreme that empty space stops behaving like emptiness? Dr. Salvatore Pais' Weapons of Time idea begins there, at the edge where the vacuum itself becomes an active medium, where fields become so intense that reality looks less like a stage and more like a substance. Plasma? Capable, at least in principle, of being pushed into regimes where the usual one-way flow of cause and effect might not hold. Wow. It's a claim with the audacity of science fiction and the vocabulary of real physics, stitched together into a single provocation. If time is physical, then time might be engineered. For those who don't know who Salvatore Pais is, I remember listening to him and he's saying he used to work or still work with Space Force in plasma-related issues. If I'm not wrong, I'm most certain I'm right. Schwinger fields and Pais' time hypothesis. Pais' headline is simple enough to sound impossible. Time is not an illusion, it's a physical feature of the universe. And if it's physical, and if it is physical, then it might be manipulable, yes. In his Weapons of Time framing, the most consequential wars wouldn't be won with force. They would be won with causality, by influencing outcomes before they occur, turning strategy into something closer to retroactive authorships. Wow! I knew I'm gonna like it. The story's first anchor point is a real one, the Schwinger regime, or Schwinger, I don't know. In mainstream quantum electrodynamics, Schwinger, I'm gonna say Schwinger as is in German. Schwinger is, okay, again. In mainstream quantum electrodynamics, Schwinger is shorthand for an extreme field threshold where the vacuum can become unstable and convert field energy into real particles pairs. Wow. That alone is already weird enough to sound like magic to a general audience. Empty space acting like a medium that can spark? But it remains in ordinary science a story about pair production and strong field vacuum behavior, not about rewriting history. Pais, then, places Hawking's chronology protection in the crosshairs. Hawking's warning label, roughly, that physics conspires to prevent time machines from forming, exist because time travel isn't merely a technical challenge, it's a paradox generator. A little bit of water. Pais' claim is that chronology protection might not hold under certain extreme engineered conditions, specifically in the vacuum spacetime system, can be driven into a regime where the arrow of time is locally disrupted. Now think of breaking the Schwinger limit, hence putting a rip, a tear into the space-time continuum locally at this point in time. This destroys the arrow of time, hence rendering a Stephen Hawking chronology protection conjecture at the point null and void. At that point, null and void. So, this estimating Hawking's hypothesis of time, I believe. Hence, time travel to the past becomes permissible. This is the idea, Salvatore Pais says. Okay, we can travel to the past through the vacuum. What makes Pais' argument so hard to classify is the way it breeds different kinds of claims into a single thread. A real strong field vacuum regime, the well-established fact that energy and geometry are coupled, and then an extrapolation that pushes beyond orthodox guardrails into past-directed causality, circular causality or retrocausality, I believe, or I guess. The fascination and the friction comes from watching those pieces lock together in his telling, even as the distance between them remains the central question. The claim rip spacetime, break the arrow. Pais talks as if spacetime is not merely geometry but something like a material. Something that can be stressed, perturbed, and in his language, ripped. That phrase is doing a lot of work. It's a way of making the most abstract object in physics, the space-time manifold, feel like it has grain and therefore failure modes. If it can tear, he argues, then causality might tear with it. This is where Minkowski matters as a conceptual foundation. Minkowski's unification of space and time into a single structure is what makes it meaningful, at least in principle, to talk about touching time with physical interventions. If space-time is one entity, then manipulating the local physical state, energy density, fields, stress, becomes, at least in a narrative terms, a way of manipulating the local behavior of time. if you know what he means. I don't, but I like to read things that I don't understand and maybe pick one or two things. Pais' next move is to connect arrow of time to something he believes could be disrupted locally. In mainstream physics, the arrow of time is deeply tied to thermodynamics, entropy increase, and boundary conditions. Pais uses destroy the arrow more like a switch, cross a threshold, enter a regime where the usual directionality might not be enforced in the same way. That's not a standard conclusion of the field, it's his hypothesis about what could happen when the vacuum becomes an engineered, far from equilibrium object instead of a passive backdrop. This is from Team Ventura. I forgot to mention, this article is from Team Ventura. Very nice reading. The reader-facing version of the claim is not Pais' proof time travel. It's Pais is proposing a pathway, a speculative chain from extreme field vacuum physics to altered causal structure. A speculative, I'm gonna repeat the last part. Pais is proposing a pathway, a speculative chain from extreme field vacuum physics to altered causal structure. The only honest way to hold it is as a question. If you could make space-time behave like a material under stress, could you also make causality behave like a material under stress? And if the answer is no, where exactly does it break? I clipped at least 2 or 3 videos from Salvatore Pais in my YouTube channel and in my TikTok channel. So if you wanna, I have the playlist in the TikTok channel. And you have the handle here in the upper left corner. He is more eloquent than me reading this article, so I have my camera or not? Oh no, I don't have it. Oh yes, I have it. Okay, hello. Let's continue. The threshold explained the vacuum spark gap. The Schwinger regime is easiest to explain by analogy. By analogy, in ordinary air, a strong enough electric field rips electrons away from atoms and you get a spark. Again, in ordinary air, a strong enough electric field rips electrons away from atoms and you get a spark. Okay. The Schwinger idea is the vacuum version. If the field is intense enough, the vacuum stops acting empty and begins producing electron-positrons pairs. Electron-positrons pairs. Matter created from field energy. Wow, that's not philosophy. That's the core intuition behind strong field QED. The vacuum is not nothing. Yeah, that makes sense. It's a structured state with limit. There's atmospheric vacuum, but total vacuum, never, of course, I believe. There's always a kind of field traversing it. Field or particle, I guess, or waves. I don't know. In normal science, entering this regime implies a cascade of violent behaviors. Pair creation, radiation reaction, plasma formation, and nonlinear vacuum effects. Wow, nonlinear vacuum effects. I wanna see this in a Google search, what comes out. If you don't mind. Just an images to see what it is. Okay, quantum fluctuation. That would be a nonlinear behavior, I guess. I don't know. Let's see another one. Okay, just a curiosity. Let's continue. The key point is that the vacuum becomes active. It doesn't just host physics, it participates. For an inventor looking for a handle on the deepest substrates of reality, this is exactly the kind of threshold that looks like a doorway. Yeah, I agree, if I am understanding anything. But it's also where the first major credibility cliff appears. Vacuum breakdown is still a story about particles and fields. It doesn't automatically become a story about space-time topology or closed time-like curves. You can have an active vacuum without having time travel. Oh no! Conflating the two is the risk. The words sound adjacent, vacuum and space-time. Both feel fundamental, but adjacency isn't implication. Oh. This is where the narrative has to stay sober. Schwinger's scale physics is real, fascinating, and extreme. Pais's move is to treat it as more than a QED phenomenon, to treat it as the lever that might perturb space-time itself into a causality-bending regime. That sounds great, even if I don't understand it fully. That move is exactly what makes his hypothesis provocative, and exactly what demands careful separation between what the Schwinger regime guarantees, vacuum becomes active, and what it does not, that the past becomes editable. The math move, Heisenberg, frequency, and minus 80? I don't know. What is this? Let's look it up. Okay. Nice to see some images. Pais' argument doesn't present itself as pure rhetoric. He tries to hang it on a compact chain of mathematical intuition, energy, time, uncertainty, and the relationship between energy and frequency. He points to the uncertainty relation as a hint that time is not merely a passive parameter, but entwined with energetic processes at the fundamental level. Wow, time and energy. From there, he makes a simplifying translation. If energy can be associated with frequency, then a characteristic time scale goes like 1 over frequency. Then, a characteristic time scale goes like 1 over frequency. Okay, that's for mathematicians. This is a move that feels intuitive to anyone who has watched oscillators. Higher frequency means shorter periods. Pais extends that intuition toward the vacuum itself, treating frequency as a proxy for how quickly the underlying substrate can update, so to speak. Then comes his most provocative flourish, a manipulation that yields a negative time increment, a minus AT. Okay, minus AT is the negative time increment, fantastic, which he interprets as a reverse temporal excursion. It's the rhetorical moment where the math stops being a scaffold and becomes a doorway. the negative sign becomes a symbol, not merely shorter time, but time in reverse. Wow! This is also the hinge where interpretation matters most. Uncertainty relations are subtle. Time is not an operator in the same way position is, and dimensional arguments can be suggestive without being decisive. Pais is using Heisenberg and frequency language to motivate a pathway. The burden of proof is on whether that pathway can be connected to a physical mechanism that produces path-directed causality rather than simply describing energetic timescales. Yeah, of course, obvious. Time as informational energy. Wow. Shannon, von Neumann, and the control problem. Cybernetics means control. Pais doesn't treat time as only a physical variable. He treats it as something like informational energy, a structured resource embedded in space-time. That choice pulls in a different set of intellectual anchors: Shannon, entropy, and the language of information theory, alongside von Neumann and the deep lineage of computation and complex systems. Yeah, you can find some archives I have from Heinz von Foster and Second Order Cybernetics, Understanding, or Cybernetics of Cybernetics. You're gonna like it. And it is made for psychologists. It's a physicist talking to psychologists about cybernetics. So you're gonna understand it more easy than this. That is mathematics and physics only. This is a clever pivot because it reframes the time question into an engineering question. If time is information-like, then manipulating time resembles manipulating information, encoding, decoding, error correction, signal to noise, stability under perturbation, and the cost of intervention. It also makes the arrow of time feel less like a mystical one-way street and more like a consequence of how information flows and degrades under real physical processes. A little bit of water. Remember what I gave the definition of time as a peculiar type of informational energy which permeates the space structure. Oh, it talks to Shannon entropy. We're talking about the greatness of von Neumann, Salvatore Pais. In the framing, the biggest obstacle isn't merely achieving extreme condition, it's control. A violent regime, an active vacuum full of cascades and radiation is not a clean laboratory instrument. It's a storm. Wow, the question becomes, can a storm be shaped into a tool? Oh, weather manipulation. And if the tool is meant to influence causality, then you're talking about steering outcomes inside systems that might be hypersensitive to initial conditions. Yeah, like a chaotic pendulum with a lot of articulation, or one articulation in the middle, like your leg, that's the movement of a chaotic pendulum. You can visualize that this kind of system this paragraph is describing. This is where the story acquires an internal coherence even before any time travel is granted. Pais is building a worldview, where reality is computational in flavor. Information, entropy, causality, and the thresholds. Whether or not one buys his final claim, the scaffolding is intelligible. He isn't arguing believing time travel, he's arguing the substrate is information rich and threshold driven. If we can engineer thresholds, we might reach deeper behavior than we currently allow ourselves to imagine. This Italian dude knows one or two things about this, right? Why Pais thinks you would need AGI, pair and counterfactual control. Pais treats weapons of time as inherently beyond human-scale cognition. Not because humans are dumb, but because the problem is monstrous. If you claim any capacity to influence the past, or even to influence present outcomes by assessing past-directed information, you are immediately dealing with counterfactuals and cascading consequences. This is why Judea Pearl shows up as a crucial reference point in his framing. Pearl's work, what is Judea Pearl? Good question. Everybody's assuming we all know this, but I don't think so, right? Okay, we now know minus AT is time travel to the past. Okay, this is a dude. Professor of computer science. Okay, enough information. This is why Judea Pearl shows up as a crucial reference point in his framing. Pearl's work is the formal language of counterfactual reasoning. Formal language of counterfactual reasoning. The difference between seeing and doing, between correlating and intervening, between prediction and control. Weapons of time, if it is anything more than a metaphor, is an intervention problem at the deepest level. Wow. Pai's broader point is that brute compute is not enough. A system can generate outputs that look impressive without actually understanding causal structure. In this context, understanding means something rigorous. Knowing what changes what, which interventions are stable, which are catastrophic, and how to reason about alternate outcomes without drowning in combinatorial explosion. In Pai's worldview, then, the weapon isn't only the field generator, it's the intelligence layer that can model and choose interventions responsibly. That framing whatever one thinks of the physics implicitly raises the bar. If the claim is meaningful at all, it is not one clever device, it is a systems-level frontier involving physics, computation, causal reasoning, and experimental discipline. Okay, quantum computing, anybody? Or AGI, like the title said? AGI and quantum computer, for sure. Paradox and governance, what replaces chronology protection? Any time travel claims walks into the same trapdoor. Paradox. The grandfather paradox is the cartoon version. But the deeper issue is consistency. If an intervention can influence the conditions that produce the intervention, what keeps reality from becoming logically incoherent? Hawking's chronology protection sits here as the mainstream pressure valve. Even if certain equations allow time machine-like structures, nature may prevent them from forming in any physically realizable way. Pais' hypothesis is, in effect, a challenge to that valve. If you can locally disrupt the arrow of time via extreme vacuum space-time conditions, perhaps the protection fails. But if the protection fails, the paradox pressure returns. And a serious story needs to ask, what replaces it? There are only a few conceptual buckets that people reach for: Self-consistency, you can't change outcomes, only fulfill them. Branching histories, you don't change your past, you move into a different track or timeline. We are in a new timeline. Every now and then, some people say, or constraints we don't yet understand that preserve consistency while allowing limited past-directed influence. Pais gestures toward bypassing the barrier. He does not fully specify the replacement. The engineering of this idea truly gives rise to temporal weapons. Weapons of time. Imagine the ability to win all wars even before those wars are fought. Salvatore Pais. Sounds like kind of familiar, you know? When someone says, we already won, you're just enjoying the show, I believe kind of related to this, I don't know. This is where weapons language becomes ethically radioactive. If a capability exists that can destabilize causality, then governance is not a policy detail, it's the primary engineering constraint. Even a tiny ambiguous effect, if real, would invite misuse, escalation, secrecy, and myth-making. The story's job is not to sermonize, it's to make the reader feel the stakes. A physics threshold linked to time is not merely cool, it's civilizationally destabilizing, whether it works or no. What a word, so difficult to read, sorry. The testability exit, what would count as evidence? A hypothesis like weapons of time either dies in a fog or survives through the testability. The only path that preserves seriousness is a ladder of claims, starting with what is measurable and climbing only as evidence allows. Oh, the music is over. Okay. How about this? The bottom rank is straightforward, demonstrates controllable entry into extreme vacuum regimes, and measures the known signatures cleanly. The next rank is harder, look for reproducible causal asymmetries. Yes. Anything that should suggest more than violent plasma behavior, not vibes, not post-hoc stories, but instrumentation that can detect timing anomalies or statistically robust deviations tied to the threshold conditions. The next rank, where people start shouting time travel, must be treated like plutonium. It requires not just correlation but an intervention signature, evidence that something like past directed influence exists in a way that can be repeated, bounded, and modeled. If that sounds impossible, good. That's what extraordinary claims should feel like before evidence arrives. And even if the ladder never reaches the top, the story still matters. Pais' Weapons of Time is a case study in how frontier ideas are assembled. Real thresholds plus unification instincts plus computation metaphors plus causal reasoning, all wielded into a provocative claim. The cultural test isn't whether we applaud or mock it, it's whether we can keep the map labeled. Known physics here, hypothesis there, and still allow the question to be asked in a way that invites experiments rather than memes. closing the vacuum's age of causality. At its best, the weapons of time idea is not a promise, it's a challenge. It demands clarity about what time is, what the vacuum is, what causality is, and what it would mean to engineer any of them. It asks whether the universe's deepest substrate behaves like a passive arena or like an active material with thresholds, phase transitions, and surprising degrees of freedom. I like the latter. At its worst, it's a seductive narrative that wraps unproven leaps in the vocabulary of profound physics. That is exactly why it's worth treating carefully rather than dismissively. Dismissal creates a cult. Oh, dismissal creates a cult. That's a good one for other kind of activities in the world aside of science, like social media. So, dismissal creates a cult, and critical belief creates a scandal. The only sane middle path is disciplined curiosity. Define the claim, identify the hinge point, ask what would count as evidence, and insist that the story ends where the instruments end. Pais is asking the forbidden question in the most direct way. If time is physical, can time be engineered? Even if the answer is no, the attempt forces something valuable, an audit of our assumptions about the one-way structure of reality, the supposedly one-way structure of reality. And if the answer is not yet, then the real weapon isn't time travel. It's the willingness to interrogate the vacuum at its limits without losing the difference between a threshold in physics and a loophole in history. Wow, great ending. Thank you very much, Mr. Tim Ventura, I believe. Let's see. Yes, Tim Ventura and Salvatore Pais. For you all. Thank you very much for being here. See you the next one. Goodbye.
Come on and cry me a river, cry me a river. I cried a river